Okay, so today we're going to talk about the influenza virus. Definitely a virus that most everybody has heard of and or has had experience with, either them themselves or somebody they know. The influenza virus is one of the most common viruses to affect humans, and do so quite yearly. So a quick history of the influenza virus. Like I said, it has been plagued humans for quite some time. The first known recordings of the pandemic started in 1580s. In the 16th century, a widespread influenza outbreak hit the Asian Minor and Northern African countries. The next recording was in the 1780s. This was in China and India and Africa, as well as the Northern American colonies at the time. So this one was quite spread out throughout the world. The next one was 1889, and this was known as the Russian pandemic, as it hit mainly several of the Russian countries. The next one was 1918, and this one was the most infamous so far, as this is the Spanish flu. This one had killed millions of people during its outbreak. The next one was 1957, known as the Asian flu, and 1976, which is known as the swine flu. Now, a key factor in the influenza virus is its capability to infect hosts across different species. This is what makes it quite unique because it infects many warm-blooded vertebrates, but predominantly pigs, birds, and humans. This is what allows these viruses to get quite nasty, is because they can grow and accumulate into, say, a pig or a bird, and they can get crossed and reassorted into humans and have very different effects and be quite dangerous. So this was first noted by veterinary J.S. Cohen in 1918. He found a correlation between the Spanish flu that was going on at the time and a disease among pigs that was also an outbreak. Now, this was before they really knocked down that it was a virus. That was figured out by N. McBride in 1928. He as well was also working with pigs. In 1933, a team consisting of Wilson Smith, Christopher Andres, and Patrick Ledreau successfully got a human influenza virus and deducted that the flu comes from a virus and it's not a bacteria. Not too long after that, in 1938, Jonas Salk and Thomas Francis created the first vaccine. So the virus itself is around 80 to 100 nanometers in size. This is pretty much on par to several other common viruses like HIV, herpes simplex 1, and the adenovirus. Now, as you can see in this diagram over here to the side, that the virus is spherical in shape. As you can tell, it contains ssRNA, and this RNA is around 14,000 base pairs long. It has about 8 of these different RNA strands. And what is also peculiar about viruses is that they come in 3 different strains. Strain A, B, and C. Now, all 3 do affect humans, and most infect the warm-blooded vertebrates, like I said, swine, birds, and animals like horses and mice, although there are differences. Now, strain A is the deadliest to humans because of a combination of there are certain exoproteins on the viruses itself, which are called hemagglutinin and neuraminidase. Now, the structure of the virus, as you can see from the right, it contains an outer lipid bilayer. Now, this serves obviously to protect and provide the integrity of the RNA inside. Now, it has 2 very iconic exoproteins on this surface called hemagglutinin and neuraminidase. Now, the blue in this image, that is the hemagglutinin, and what this protein does is that it attaches to the exoproteins on a host cell and that allows for the virion to be drawn into the cell. Now, the red exoproteins in the diagram, as you can see, are called neuraminidase. Now, these are the proteins that once the new viruses leave the cell, these cut potential grabs that the hemagglutinin has on the host cell proteins so that the viruses can leave and not get stuck on. The tiny purple little proteins are called M2 ion channels, and these are simply proton transport channels that help with the reproduction of the virus. And obviously on the inside is the ribonucleoprotein. So, like I said, the influenza strand A is the deadliest among humans because of a combination of their hemagglutinins and neuraminidase. There are 18 different hemagglutinins and 11 different neuraminidase proteins. These can form together to produce different strains that come and infect people yearly. For instance, you can have a combination of these popular ones that have caused huge problems, like the Spanish flu, which was the H1N1. It's the combination of the first hemagglutinin protein and the first neuraminidase protein. Or like the Hong Kong flu, which was the third hemagglutinin and the second neuraminidase. So replication is quite interesting. So the virion gets to the cell, the hemagglutinin attaches to the exoproteins of the cell and gets drawn into the cell. The lipid bilayer gets split apart, and the RNA gets into the nucleus. It replicates, goes out, gets translated. Part of the proteins go to the surface of the cell, which is the neuraminidase and the hemagglutinin, while other gets brought into the nucleus and sends back out where it's sent to the Golgi apparatus. And once it reaches the cell wall, then it gets wrapped up in the hemagglutinin and neuraminidase. And for this, the virion to leave the cell, obviously you need the neuraminidase to cut the potential grabs. And that is how replication takes place. So reassortment, this is another feature that makes viruses so deadly, is that since they are cross-species, you can have different combinations as they spread through their different hosts. And for instance, how we get our vaccines yearly is that new strands are created and grown into chicken embryos because they most resemble us humans, our kind of immune system. And so they can grow stronger in there, and then obviously we can create the vaccines and get us attenuated for the future strains that are supposed to come out. The flu itself is obviously what is caused by the influenza virus. Transmission and symptoms. The flu is transmitted, as most other viral infections do, by droplets from the sick person. These come from the mucus and saliva, so they are often spread by coughing and sneezing, and transfer by drinking and kissing, whatever comes. Symptoms, they are most similar to the cold, but with a few different exceptions. So fever, cough, sore throat, and stuffy nose are typically, hard to distinguish between if you have the flu or the cold, but symptoms like body aches and headaches, fatigue, vomiting, and nausea are real distinguishable to the flu. So treatment. Now, as it's being a virus, there aren't many medications that can help just cure the flu like you do with if you're sick with a bacterial infection or whatever. You can take antibacterial medicine to kill the bacteria. Viruses don't work like that, so you have to take medication that either inhibit certain factors on the virus so that they can stop reproducing, or you can just let it run its course. But the two main kind of antiviral medications are, they consist of neuraminidase inhibitors or M2 protein inhibitors. So medicine like Mavir and zanamivir prevent neuraminidase proteins to form with the cutting angles on the virus cells, so they can't cut off the attaching proteins. So they are all stuck to the cells. They can't leave and reproduce like that. The M2 protein inhibitors like amantadine and remantadine block the M2 ion channel. So this blocks replication of the virus. Now, this is only found in A strain viruses. B strain viruses do not contain the M2 ion channel binding site that these drugs particularly target. Prevention. Really, the only main way of preventing this virus is yearly vaccinations. Being vaccinated is by far the best way of combating getting sick. Not only are you not preventing, because there is still a slight possibility you can get it, because it's not perfect science. There is a chance that with you getting it, you could get it, but most of the time it's not like that. With you getting it, you become partially immune to what is going on now and possibly next year if the hemagglutinins and neuraminases are nearly identical. Now, not only are the vaccinations good for you, but they're also good for the young and elderly or immunocompromised people that you encounter. Now, obviously, as many sicknesses go, daily cleanliness helps a bunch. Washing your hands, drinking plenty of water, and maintaining a healthy diet will go a long ways in preventing sickness, not just the flu, but several other bacterial or viral infections. And that's been a great discussion on the flu.